This is Sam Kirby, host of Cinema Stories. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Jordan Butler, host of Head Over Heels, here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Head Over Heels, where we talk about everything the Miss America organization. A new show comes out bi-monthly. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Head Over Heels. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
You've been waiting for this for half an hour, so thank you so much for seeing by as we get our work together. Let's jump right in. First of all, thank you to Baxter and Public House Media for working with us to connect us to programs tonight. I have two amazing friends and guests with me tonight who I am very excited to introduce you to and who have very important things for us to chat about tonight. So first, let me welcome Ms. Diane Nutting. Diane, can you tell us first where you are, and can you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got to this point?
Sure. Hi, Nicole. Thanks for having us join you tonight. This is super fun now that we have technology taken care of. I am based in the Washington, D.C. area, and my backstory is that I have worked at the intersections of disability, arts, and education for pretty much my entire professional life. And how those intersections have actualized has always shifted depending on the organization I've been working with. I've mainly been based in nonprofit organizations. The demographic that I've been working with, the programs that I've been charged to oversee. So that's always shifted, but it's always been those intersections of those three areas. I've been working in nonprofit institutions up until about a little over a year ago. And then I transitioned into sort of a different phase of my professional life, and I'm currently a consultant. So I work in the DC area and beyond. Again, at those intersections of disability, arts, and education, I do a lot of work with a wide range of cultural arts organizations, theaters, museums, sometimes education-based organizations or advocacy-based organizations. And what I do is really in sort of three different areas. I design and implement trainings for individuals to explore accessibility and inclusion. And that can be anything from working with teaching artists in the class who work in the classroom all the way through volunteers who might work in a museum setting about how we frame accessibility and inclusion through a customer service lens. I do some strategic planning and visioning with organizations who are just dreaming forward and want to think about their own journey of accessibility and inclusion and what that looks like. And then the third part of what I do, I sort of put under the catch-all of project coordination, which usually means I'm working with an organization to plan, design, and implement some sort of direct service implementation, and then usually I'm involved in the implementation of that. So I've worked as an accessibility coordinator for festivals. I'm currently working with a theater company to implement a sensory-friendly initiative for their first sensory-friendly performance. So that's what I do.
Amazing. There are so many things around what you just said that I'm excited to dive into and ask you questions about. So stand by while we introduce our other guest. Hello and welcome, Miss Talleri McRae. Hello. Thank you, Talleri, for joining. Can you tell us where you are located and what you do and kind of the journey that led you to do that?
Sure. I'm in my house, which is in Louisville, Kentucky. So I'm currently based in Louisville, Kentucky. And I grew up doing theater it was something that my first grade teacher told my mom that I read with a lot of expression and that I should get into a drama class. So that was the end of that. That was when I was 6, and it's been over 30 years and I'm still doing the same thing. And so I studied theater as an undergraduate student and have always been interested in teaching as well. So I know Diane and I both kind of wear hats as theater practitioners, but also teachers. And when I was in graduate school down in Austin, Texas, I got really interested in representations of disability. I have mild cerebral palsy, and when I was in college, I was in a production of To Kill a Mockingbird. And my final performance of that show, I overheard some middle school students talking in the lobby, and one of them turned to one of their friends and said, "Man, that actor played Scout's disability so well." And it made me laugh because Scout Finch doesn't have a disability, but I do. And so I was really interested in that. And I wrote a thesis about the different ways that disability is represented in theater, specifically when you're looking at theater for young audiences. And then I got really lucky, and my life and work in Louisville has kind of come. I've been in Louisville for about 7 years now, and all of my interests have kind of come together. Like Diane always says, the intersection of theater and education and accessibility. So I spend a lot of my time in the classroom working with kids, ages 4 to 21. I spend some time with teachers doing professional development, and sometimes that has to do with accessibility and sometimes it doesn't. And then every once in a while, a theater company calls me and says, "Hey, we're really interested in making something more accessible. Can you help?" So I try to always say yes and then go from there.
So what I'm interested in is, Diane, I'm going to go back to you and specifically slate it to you, but Talleri, please jump in if you have things to add. Is you're talking about kind of the arts as the gateway to talking about and sharing, and especially at this kids and teaching level, as a way for it to be teachable and to introduce it in. What are we seeing now in classrooms? And then what would we like to see in the future?
I want to make sense understanding the question properly. Are you saying how are we using arts as a conduit for accessibility and inclusion, or just in general, what does an inclusive classroom look like?
Yeah, let's start with what does an inclusive classroom look like. Let's start at the base level, and then we'll add arts on top.
Sure. I think for me, and I've really been taking. So I used to be on staff with Imagination Stage, which is a performing arts company here in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And back in 2008, they took what I call, what I've lovingly called an aggressive journey towards inclusion. We really started looking at what that meant and what walking the walk meant of the talk that we were talking. And so I've really been exploring it over the last several years. And for me, it comes back to this idea of community and belonging, and this idea that, everyone has meaningful engagement, and that there's an intentional, I use the phrase on a project that I recently worked on, intentional invitation, that there has to be, I think there's a lot of families of young children with disabilities who still assume that we don't mean their child. And they shouldn't assume that, but they are concerned that that somehow their child won't be welcomed in the same way. So I always talk about intentional invitation and membership and this idea of belonging. And I recently heard a quote from Brene Brown that really struck with me, this idea of that fitting in requires you to change who you are, and belonging requires you to be who you are. And I love that because I think we have to constantly challenge ourselves as educators when we are creating inclusive environments. At the end of the day, are we constructing an environment where we're asking kids to fit in, or we're asking kids to belong? And I think it's a tightrope that we have to walk to really make sure that we're moving more towards belonging. I'm sure
absolutely.
Has thoughts about this because she and I talk about this all the time.
We do. And
so please, what do you have to add?
as I share my thoughts, I'm going to plug in my computer so I don't go away. Hang on one. This will be fun.
I could also plug mine in as well. So please do.
Inclusion means having power in your computer. Okay.
I love it. Happy to debate with you.
I was kind of, first of all, Nikki, you're very brave to have Diane and I on at the same time, because she and I are dear, dear friends. And one of the things that I think makes inclusion and accessibility work is being willing to try something and have it go horribly wrong and try again. And I'm really lucky that in my life I have a Diane. And I use that word as, like, I always tell people you have to find your Diane, right? Which is the person that you could call and say, I tried something and it went horribly, horribly wrong. And I need to talk about it and feel better about it so that I can try again, you know?
It works both ways too. I have a Talleri too.
But when, Nikki, when you first asked the question about kind of what is inclusion and then separating that out from what is arts inclusion look like in the arts classroom, it's really hard for me to separate out because I am a theater teacher and I feel really lucky as a theater artist because the art of theater already gives me a huge toolbox to use to make a welcoming, inclusive space. Theater already gives me creativity. It gives me a diversity of perspectives. It gives me a channel into empathy and understanding others that might be different from myself. So for me, it's hard to unstick those two ideas because they're really close together. And I love when Diane talks about a sense of intentionality, because there is a sense of, I'm going to be inclusive and I'm going to be really intentional about who I invite, how I welcome them, and how I actually change the space to be inclusive, and that's important. And with that being said, I do think that being an arts educator already gives us a little bit of an advantage. We have a little bit of a privilege there because we're already starting with a really great toolbox to work from.
Can I just add to that? Because I say this to teaching artists all the time, because I've gone to other inclusion conferences, and a lot of the people that are working with, in rec programs, they're always like, relationships, how are we going to get the kids to talk to each other? And I'm always saying, we do everything in a circle in theater. So it's just inherent, and I think that when I ask teaching artists to think about what a moment when they really had a sense of belonging, they're talking, they name things that are very inherent to an arts experience. They talk about being accepted for their authentic self, that they were able to, contribute with their own value and with their own strengths. And I think those are so inherent. And I think where the arts struggles a little bit, and this is something Talleri and I talk a lot about, is there is an academic content to what we do, and not to downplay recreational sports, for example, but it's not as simple as we're just going to put water wings on a kid and now they can do improvisation all of a sudden, right? It's not like a simple adaptation. We have to think. It's hard. I mean, we have to think about how are we breaking down the curriculum and breaking down the information in a different way. But I always feel like we've got it. We're so much farther ahead in terms of relationships and acceptance and equality. Not that there still aren't hiccups, but I totally agree with Tal. I just think we're just leaps and bounds ahead than some of our other recreation folk.
What do we have room for? What changes can we see that still need to be made?
I think about this a lot. I think that many programs in the last 10, 15 years are slowly building their toolbox. They are learning from great consultants like Diane the concrete things they can do to make their spaces accessible, to make their physical space accessible, to make their social space accessible, to make their behavioral space accessible. But it feels very much like that. The goal of that is that once it's accessible and everyone's included and everyone is participating in some way, that we've reached our goal of inclusion. And I love when Diane uses the word belonging, because belonging has this really deep undertone of being needed, that the work doesn't go forward without your contribution. And so I think that we have to really push ourselves as artists to say, just because a child participated does not mean that they were included. Was that participation meaningful? Was that participation crafted and honed in the same way that a student without a disability, not in the same exact way, because you can't quite compare it side by side, but is there the same sense of craft and refinement and revision? And are we offering opportunities for students with disabilities, for artists with disabilities, to skill build and have the skills that are needed to go further into high school arts, into undergraduate arts programs, into graduate programs? And I think part of that has to do with our own expectation. Are we expecting that some kind of success? It might not look the same as their non-disabled peers, but it's going to look like something. And if we expect more of them, I think we'd be surprised.
And when you say if we expect, are you talking about society as a whole? Are you talking about us as individuals? What do you mean by that?
I think I was mostly talking as a teacher.
Okay.
And thinking about a teacher expectation, but I also think it has to do with, again, like, what does the high school teacher expect? Are we brave enough as teachers that are trying more and more complex things to work some flexibility into our schedule, to be open to trying a new idea, to casting a student we might not have thought is the classic type for a certain kind of role? You know, we've made a lot of headway when it comes to diversity in casting, when you think about race and sometimes even about gender. But with disability, it's like, oh, if the character, you know, has one line about how they have to drive a car, then that means they have to have, you know, all four limbs and be at the same intellectual capacity as someone else. And that I think that there's a lot more opportunity there.
Absolutely. Can we talk about that a little bit? What is it? I know there's a huge push right now to see and be seen. Where are our disability faces in the movies? Where are they on stage? Why are we not seeing them? What are your thoughts on that? I can ask a more pointed question, but also I know it's a big topic to kind of delve into.
Diane, do you want to start with that? I've been talking.
Sure. I mean, I think what's really interesting is we're having this conversation, right, about representation, right? And particularly it's a really hot topic right now. I mean, you know, the movie Wonder is coming out, you know, they have The Good Doctor is on TV, and, you know, there is more representation happening by individuals with disabilities on TV, you know, through either, I'm thinking of there's a reality, Born This Way, right, which is a reality television show of young people with Down syndrome, young adults with Down syndrome, and then Micah Fowler, who's on Speechless. And I think that's great. I think what Talleri just touched on, and is something that I think we continue to have to challenge ourselves as an art field, is it, I mean, it seems like we're trying to work towards this plateau, right, of we're casting individuals with disabilities to play characters with disabilities. Yes. And the next step is, why can individuals with disabilities only play characters with disabilities, right? Like what, you know, and this is something that is really, that I've been really percolating on recently, the idea that there's not a lot of post-secondary training for individuals, for example, with cognitive, developmental, intellectual disabilities in the arts. There just isn't. And I think it's because there's this mind frame of, well, those people aren't really going to get jobs, so what's the point in having a training program? And it's like, well, you know, they're like, how many shows with disabilities are there really? And I'm like, well, there is, you know, 10 right now if we do our math. But at the same time, why is that the limitation? I mean, and not to call Talleri out, but Talleri is a perfect example of an individual who played a wide range of roles when she was a professional actress and when she was in college. And they had nothing to do with the fact that she may or may not identify with a disability at any point in her life, So those are my feelings. I think we just need to keep pushing ourselves. I think we're getting better, but we have a long way to go. Personally, I feel.
There's such a great opportunity here for us to not just embrace this as a social idea, but also as an artistic one. One of my most recent projects was that I was the accessibility consultant when the most recent production of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime was just performed at Indiana Repertory Theater. And it's actually still playing in Syracuse Stage. So if you're in Syracuse, go see it. It closes on Sunday. But that production features Mickey Rowe, who is an actor with autism, playing that role. And I got to go see the student matinee where he had a post-show discussion with 100 audience members, many of whom are on the spectrum. And they sat in a room and talked to each other and answered questions. And first of all, the energy in that room was electric. I really felt, and Mickey says this all the time, it's the power of authenticity, right? Mm-hmm. It's not about getting the exact right person, actor to play the exact right disability. It's the idea that oftentimes a character that's written with a disability is representing a cultural barrier, right? That part of their story in that performance is to show a cultural barrier. Well, that can be represented in a lot of different ways, right? That can be represented with an actor of color, with an actor of a different gender, with an actor of a different age, with an actor with a different disability. So I really got to see firsthand Mickey's performance, which was phenomenal. He's trained as a circus arts performer, so he was literally hanging on the stage sometimes, which was great. And he said, you really do the autism community a service when you represent a different underrepresented group as an autistic character, because that shows there's diversity in the autism community, not just white men have autism, right? That's really interesting. And I think that there's something exciting about that artistically, right? If you cast a person with a disability in a role, even if it wasn't written that way, you are adding a layer to the story that then brings up this idea of a cultural barrier, right? And that adds to the idea of conflict, that adds to the idea of struggle. And hopefully, if you're a tasteful director or artist, you will let that play out in a thoughtful and meaningful way that doesn't disrupt the story that you're telling, but it's just part of the human experience. We all feel separate from our peers at some point. We all feel different. We all feel that way. So I think it's an artistic opportunity too. And I'll stop talking now.
No, you ladies I'm just couldn't be more excited and thankful that you stuck with me tonight, because you're both so articulate and obviously very much experts in this field that we're talking about. So I love that you're able to elaborate in this way. I'm wondering, both of you have talked about this word consultant, specifically in the arts. Can you tell me, what does that mean when we're talking specifically, you're going into a theater to consult? What does that mean? Diane, do you want to start?
Sure. So, I'm working on a project right now with, I think a consultant can mean a lot of different things. What I'm learning is that, it's been a little bit of a new journey for me, and consultant sort of means, being able to shapeshift, if you will, and be what the client needs you to be. So sometimes the client needs you to be sort of a safe sounding board where they can kind of talk through their mess, or sometimes you need to be the person that comes on. I know Talleri and I have talked about this. We've both been in this position where we've had to we've had to come in and have the conversation that really everybody in the room should be having, but somehow someone in the organization can't be facilitating that conversation. It needs to be someone from the outside saying, so what I'm hearing is blah, blah, blah. And that sometimes, and we've all had consultants that have come into situations and been an outside voice for us. So I think that that's definitely something. Sometimes it's bringing expertise and networks and connections. I'm working with an organization right now that's embarking on their first sensory friendly journey. And, a lot of what I'm doing is helping them sort of have a better understanding of the audience that would take advantage of that experience here. And they happen to be in the DC area. So, just talking to them about how the audience in the DC area responds to sensory friendly experiences. What are they looking for? What is the language they want to hear? What is the connection they want to have? And sometimes it's just very nuts and bolts. I think a lot of time it's, and I'll be interested to hear what Talleri says, but I think a lot of time it's addressing fear. There's a lot of concern. It's often, we're scared we're going to say the wrong thing. We're scared we're going to do the wrong thing. And years ago, before I was even a consultant, I remember, watching an usher literally try to become one with the wall while an individual with a wheelchair came by. And I could just see the gears turning of, well, if I don't say anything and if I don't do anything, then I haven't offended anyone. And therefore I have been, I've done the right thing. And so I think a lot of times a consultant is there to say, let's talk about what you're frightened of. What are you concerned about? What are your, I think every organization, whether or not they will tell you or not, carries with them a, remember that time that XYZ happened and it was horrible. And I think that's sometimes volunteers have that, they know of this, a situation that kind of spiraled out of control and they felt like they were out of control and they didn't do good customer service. And so now they're afraid. So I think a consultant is sort of almost a life coach for the organization sometimes. Does that make sense? Just kind of helping them get to where they need to be. And sometimes where they need to be is not necessarily where you want. You have a grand vision and you have to keep reminding yourself that people are on a journey. I use that phrase a lot, journey, that, and I tell teaching artists, you're on a journey with this work and your students are on a journey. And sometimes I have to remind myself, sometimes I'm working with an organization and I have to be like, okay, so that energy right there is that person's on a different journey. And, they're going to come, they're going to come along. They're going to eventually be on the train. But right now they're sort of just, feeling out the train and seeing if they want to get on board. And that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. Talleri?
For me, I think consulting is a lot of listening and really hearing what people want and what people are able to do to take the next step forward. And for me, accessibility is not about getting anywhere. It's about what is the next thing that we can operationalize as a team to feel like we're the next step closer. So in my work, consulting splits into 3 kind of separate piles. The first pile is a project-based consultancy where Indiana Repertory Theater calls me and says, we're doing The Curious Incident of the Dog at Nighttime and we've cast Mickey Rowe and we need help making our performances accessible to the autism community. Great, I can do that. Really clear start and end date, and I can help with that. The second kind of consultancy is a little bit more of the organizational life coach that Diane was talking about. And I have had a relationship as the access, inclusion, and education consultant at Actors Theater of Louisville here in town. This is my 3rd season with them. And every season I sit down with the different departments in that theater and I say, what goals do you have for accessibility? And we look at the calendar and we look at what other things they're doing and we say, what are the really doable action items for this season that we can get done? And then we usually get about half of those done. But that's moving forward, So I hung out with their box office staff a couple of weeks ago, and we said, you know what, this year we think we can tackle some frequently asked questions that specifically address accessibility for the theater. So we're going to work on that document. And then the third part of consulting is the part that actually takes money instead of brings money in. But it also takes more than money. It takes time and effort and energy, but it's actually really fun. It's what I love about it. And it's connecting with people like you, people like Diane, attending conferences if you're a conference person and you can do that. Spending some time on social media, spending some time on the internet, finding sources that you can trust and practitioners that are doing work that you're really excited about, and staying kind of up to date with what's going on, because right now we're in such a moment where we have this opportunity. And I think it's really important to be able to tell a casting director that sends me an email, yeah, I can get the word out that you're looking for an actor with a disability, and I've got 5 people I can send that to in the next half hour. And that's really important. And that's the fun part too, but that's the easiest part to let go. So
Absolutely.
No, amazing. I for real could talk to both of you ladies all night long. I'm so thankful for your time, but also want to be respectful of it. So my last question for both of you then is, first of all, where can our friendly viewers find you? Do you have email addresses? Do you have something? I'm happy to, if they want to find you, how do our friendly listeners find you? That's our first question. Diane, go for it.
No, go for it, Tal.
All right, Diane, all you.
Let's see. We could do that for days. I'm on LinkedIn, and I also, you can reach me at nettingdiane@gmail. That's my professional email, and you can reach me there. But yeah, I'm reachable via LinkedIn and all of that, and finding me that way. That's probably the best way to reach me. And
and Nicole, feel free to share my email. I'm talleri.a.mcrae. My middle initial is A, at gmail.com. So do that. And if you'll just do me a favor and put in the subject line that you are watching us on the internet and you have an accessibility question, that's super helpful.
I saw you.
Wait, did you have another question, Nikki, or was it just how to reach us?
I was going to round that off with, and also, yes, also those who are listening, you can easily email you, and I can connect you to these two ladies. I didn't share how we met, but part of my journey of disability was we all met through the Community Center has an amazing disability arts program called VSA, and they threw a big, the whole town participated. All of Washington, D.C. was part of the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and all 3 of us were able to meet there and connect. I'm so thankful that was my connection to you two ladies. But my next and last question for you guys is what's next? What is next on your docket? What are you looking forward to in life? It's Diane.
Life? Wow.
What are you looking forward to? It could be anything. It doesn't have to be work related. It could be that, you're headed to New York to see a show. I don't know.
You want to go first, Tal?
Sure. Nikki, we had such a blast when we met in the summer of 2015. If you haven't done Theater Games at a 10 outside the Smithsonian, you haven't lived. It's fantastic.
By the way.
And Diane and I met years ago at a conference for the American Alliance for Theater and Education. And I have stayed really active in that organization, which brings together theater teachers and educators and artists and researchers. And I'm actually coordinating an event here in Louisville the first weekend of February. So February 2nd through the 4th, 2018. We are gathering in Louisville to look at best practices in accessible theater education. So come join us if you want. It'll be a blast. We have disability advocate, storyteller, and playwright Kevin Kling coming from Minneapolis. I'm super excited. He's amazing. So come hang out with him if nothing else. We're all going to go see a sensory-friendly performance of Hamlet, performed by Stage One. It's a co-production with Stage One and the Kentucky Shakespeare Festival. And the Kentucky Center is actually one of the most accessible buildings in the country. So they're actually demonstrating all of the other access services that they offer as part of that sensory-friendly show. So if you want to check out what audio description's like, or see the sign that they use for open captioning, or check out accessible seating or any other kind of access service you might need, that'll be part of that as well. And we'll see a bunch of theater together and have really smart people in the same room talking. And my goal for that gathering is that everyone leaves with a Diane that they feel comfortable checking in with and talking to, and just really having that safe space of trying new things out and not being afraid to do that.
I'm not even Diane, and that gave me the feels, okay?
Awesome.
That sounds like Talleri. That's so exciting. So exciting.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I have a lot of different irons in the fire right now, none of which I can actually talk about publicly yet. But I'm really excited. I'm really excited with a lot of the conversations I'm having in the next several weeks. Moving into the holidays and just thinking about and Talleri said something that really struck me, because it is exciting to be able, I think as a consultant, you do have this different division of time where you can actually deeply research in the field. And I think that has been one of the most exciting parts of this past year for me, is that I have been able to network and talk to people all over the country and all over the field that are just doing incredible work. I'm able to, spend time researching articles and making connections. And I love connecting people. It's one of my things that I love more than anything else. So I love being able to have people that are, that are working on a project, and I say, oh, you know who you need to talk to? We're these people over here, and I make those connections that way. So that's something that I'm really continuing to look forward, and I'm excited to see what the next couple months hold. I think there's going to be a lot of really exciting projects, and I'm hoping to launch a website. So that's something I'm looking forward to. So.
Amazing.
But only because Nicole Kelly has given me advice on how to do that.
I told her to be shameless and take pictures of everything. That was my advice.
She did tell me to do that. It's true.
I am so thankful for both of you. And yet again, I could honestly talk about this with you, both of you, forever. So thank you for sticking with me for as long as you have tonight. I really do appreciate it. It's past my bedtime, so I'm sure it's past your bedtime as well. So thank you so much again. And thank you all for watching Loud and Proud. And thanks to Public House Media once again for hosting us tonight. Thank you, ladies, so much.